the bottom. So it's very useful to know that. Okay, so to keep going down this, if you can recognize you're not in your window, the number one goal is to get back in your window. As much as possible, don't make any decisions or come to any conclusions from outside of your window. Again, easier said than done in reality, but the more that you practice and grow into this, you'll be able to catch it more and more. How I like to think of it is, even if I don't know how to get back in my window, or I don't want to, because sometimes when you're out of there, you're just so mad you don't care, and you don't want to get back in. But if I can recognize I'm not in my window, what I'm going to think about is, as much as possible, I'm not going to make decisions or come to conclusions. I'm going to stop, drop, and roll. Do you guys ever have fire safety growing up where they said if smoke comes, stop, drop, and roll? I almost visually picture that, rather than I'm just up in my thoughts in the room and way up high where all the fire and flames are. I'm going to stay low to the ground. I'm going to stay very low. How many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? So this is a rendering of that. But basically, in Maslow's hierarchy, over time, people's goal is to ultimately get to a place of self-actualization. And that's something that a lot of times they reference Mother Teresa. It's entering agape love or your service to the world. We all want that in some way to figure out what we have to offer to the world. However, if you are not in your window, it's not the time to self-actualize. It's not the time to figure out your greater purpose in life or measure how you're doing in terms of that. Yet, usually when we bump out of our window, our mind starts getting flooded with all these thoughts about our worth and our value and how we're doing. So again, if you can recognize you're not in your window, go back to the bottom, stay low to the ground. Just focus on your basic needs. And that's something I'll talk a little bit more about in the future, is how you get back in the window. But just a quick general visual or reference point, if you can recognize you're there, stay low to the ground. Stop, drop, and roll. The other thing, because for me, pictures are really helpful in understanding concepts. So when I say, as much as possible, don't make decisions or come to any conclusions, when I say don't come to any conclusions, I mean about yourself, your value, the situation, or other people. Because usually when we get triggered, we're getting flooded with so many different thoughts. I'm an idiot, or I'm a failure, or fill in the blank of whatever are your tendencies of negative messages about yourself or your worth that come. I almost picture it like my inner world is like a house. And I'm in my living room, and suddenly there's all these knocks on the door. First, I want to actually make sure I have a door, that they're not just flooding in. That's part of the work sometimes, is some people don't even have a door in their house, and any negative thought comes in. Which, let me just say this real quick. If you've never heard this before, I think it's really helpful to know that you don't have to think everything that you're thinking. You don't have to think everything that you think. Thoughts fly in, but we choose whether we own it or not. There's this one story, I'll probably butcher it a little bit, but I think it's about, it's this Native American grandfather and his grandson, and he's telling him the story about these two wolves. And one of the wolves represents good, and one of the wolves represents evil. And he asks his grandson, which one wins? Any of you know which one wins? Good or evil? You know it. So we all hope, or I'm guessing we all hope good wins, but what actually wins? What the grandfather tells his grandson is, whichever one you feed. So when we feed positive or truths about ourselves, it grows. When we feed negatives, it grows. So what we're learning intentionally is how to starve out the negative beliefs and thoughts, and how to feed and grow the positive ones. So back to that inner home analogy, if all those different thoughts are knocking on my door, it's almost like I'm aware of them. So I'm out of my window and I see all these thought patterns coming. I can go this route of catastrophic thinking or this route of catastrophic thinking. So it's more like I see you, but I'm not letting you into my house to entertain you. I'm not going to host you and feed you. I see that you're there, but I'm more going to keep you in suspended animation. I love processing and analyzing, and it's also one of my strengths. But all of our strengths without a healthy boundary on it becomes a weakness. So the very thing that we're strong in, if we don't have a boundary there to protect it, it will actually bring destruction. It's like a fire ripping through a home is destructive to the home. But within the confines of the hearth, you get to enjoy the warmth of the fire. So my gift of processing and analyzing needs to have a hearth around it. Otherwise, it's going to spin me out of control. If I'm processing and analyzing and problem solving from within my window, that's going to be useful. If I'm processing and analyzing from up here, that's not going to be useful. It will be destructive. It will actually re-imprint negative patterns into my brain. So I'm going to see that those thoughts are coming, but I'm not going to take the bait. I'm going to recognize I can't see this situation clearly, I'm overwhelmed, so I'm not going to figure out now until I can get back in my window. Does anyone know or want to know how to get back in your window? Okay, so next week, you'll have to know. I will tell you if you really want to know. So it's a little bit different for every person in every situation because there's a variety. We might just be a little bit out of our window, or we might be a lot out of our window. And everyone functions a little bit differently, but this will at least give you a few guidelines. This is something in more a workshop style. We go more in depth individually, but in this state, I at least want to give you some general frameworks that can help you start in figuring this out. After I take a dramatic water pause. Okay, so one thing before you figure out how to get back in your window is actually growing in the skill of attunement. So attunement is a concept extremely similar to mindfulness or self-awareness. They're very synonymous terms. I like the term attunement because of the connotation that comes with it, or attunement is becoming attuned to what's happening on the inside of you. But the key about attunement is you're doing so from a kind and non-judgmental stance towards yourself. So you're just learning, you're becoming a student of your inner world, and you're starting with being curious, but from a kind and non-judgmental stance. Because as soon as we get frustrated with ourselves that it's going a certain way, or we're angry that it's happening again, or I should have known better, suddenly we bump ourselves out of our window, and then we're spiraling again. So the only way is to actually grow in kindness towards yourself, which can sound really touchy-feely, but it's actually neurologically imperative for you to be able to move forward. In a way, it's almost like you're learning how to parent yourself. The parenting that you might not have gotten, you're learning to parent yourself and be curious and kind and learn about yourself. So attunement is something that's really key, and it's a muscle that you build over time. First of all, you've just automatically grown in it just by being here, because now you have a framework. Your brain is now aware of something it might have not have ever been aware before. So you've just grown in attunement. And also, this is a skill that you'll build over your life. It's a muscle. It's just like if you go to the gym and you've never worked out a part of your body before, it's painful, it's a lot of hard work, it's flabby. It takes time to build that. It takes time to build the muscle memory of how to move or how to lift those weights. This is actually mental training. It's training our brains so that we don't just react to whatever happens, we actually have intention and control over situations. It's a muscle that you develop over time called self-awareness that leads to many other good benefits. So again, I just want you to have the right framework that, yes, this is something that you'll be instantly able to apply and it will change things, and this is an ongoing skill. So for example, it could be a situation that you have happen over and over and over again with someone where you don't even know that you're acting a certain way. It just goes bad, and that's how you know. And then maybe the next time you step into that situation and it goes bad again, and then after, you're like, oh yeah, I learned about that window. I was not in my window. And then maybe the next time you go into a similar situation, and during it, you're suddenly out of your window, and you recognize you're out of your window, but you have no idea what to do differently. And you still, the situation still bombs, but you had awareness. And then maybe the next time you're in the situation and it's just about to get to the tipping point, and then you picture that train track. Oh, a new pathway just formed, or I can actually ask for a break for a second and take a breather, or let's take 5, or all the things I'll just talk about in a second of actual strategies. But basically, you're going to grow an awareness which will allow you to be agile. To me, it's emotional agility. There's so much that happens with all these startups and fast-growing things and there's so many people's personalities and feelings and just things that come up. So to actually grow on the agility to be aware and then have a way to move differently is a massive skill to develop. And that's part of that concept of scaling within, because who gets taught this stuff? I mean, you're getting taught it right now, but in general, people don't teach us this stuff. We just go through life doing the best we can. We get skilled in our actual area, but we don't always learn how do we actually grow in our emotional capacity to handle situations. So again, the biggest skill is attunement and growing in that. And then as far as if you're out of your window, how do you get back in? Okay, so you ready for the key? So the key to getting back in your window is the present moment. And your body is the key to the present. So there's so many different conceptualizations about how we're made as humans, like body, soul, spirit, or this way or that. But if you think about it, if we're up in our window, we're flying high in our thoughts. We're not connected to our physical body. So our body is actually what grounds us and brings us into the present. That's why for a lot of you at the beginning, when you pictured a place where you knew you were in your optimal self, for a lot of people it's being in nature or outdoors. A lot of people it's being in a beautiful place because you're present, you're in your body. So basically, the body is the key to being present. And then I love this thing I learned sometimes as a kid, and probably you've heard it, maybe you haven't. Either way, it's definitely worth repeating, but this is how it goes. It says, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. Anyone ever heard that before? Okay, I'm gonna say it one more time. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. So the gift is always in the present moment. The only way that we can receive good things or value is in the present. Most people struggle with either being stuck in the past or anxious about the future, always reaching and going towards something, always driving. And I would guess in general, that's probably the big tendency in this room, if it's in startup culture, and we're always driving forward. And how do we balance that forward movement with being aware of the present and receiving the joy of the present? Even if you think about this, I also picture this sometimes as like a riverbed, or my goal is to be in the middle. If I'm in the middle, I can move forward. I can access innovative thoughts. I can access flow states. I can access creativity. I can access all the parts of my brain to put things together and think of creative solutions. If I'm triggered and go on either side, I'm stuck on the banks. I'm stuck. I can't go anywhere. So the goal is to get back into your window so that you can flow forward and move forward. That being said, a few tips and tricks that I think about when I think about how do I get back in my window. Again, it's very different for every person, but in it being the body, the 5 senses are then really your key. So if you think about the 5 senses, leveraging those to your advantage. So just a few examples, just as an idea. So with sight or vision, being aware of your visual environment, being aware of things that make you happy or environments that are peaceful or inspiring, That's a big thing, rather than being in a gloomy, dark area working all the time. Like, that's one of the reasons I love working out of this space is when there's sun out, there's so much light and the ceilings are high. I don't feel constrained in here. So being aware of what works for you and leveraging that, that's being intentional just rather than reacting. I know that for me to perform my best, I want to be in a space that's inspiring. Another example of how you can leverage the visual. So I think this could be a cool trick to have either on your phone or computer, but you have like a little bank of images or videos that bring you joy. Whether that's cat videos are your thing, or cute babies, or funny little comedy bits, but things that when you look at that or watch it, you don't have to think twice. You don't have to muster up the energy to change your brain state. From the inside out, it automatically brings you joy or laughter. It's almost like if I'm out of my window, it's when your computer gets stuck, when that spinning wheel of death comes on and it's just stuck. It's like, I need to shift my brain state. I need something I need to restart my computer. So even having those little images or things that you don't have to think your way through it from the inside out, it changes your brain state. So another one would be the sense of smell, something like essential oils, if any of you are familiar with that. That's something in my former therapy practice we would use all the time, and I still use it with clients now. But so if someone is heightened up here, we might use lavender. If you smell something like lavender, it brings calming to your body, and it brings you present if you're up in your thoughts. That's something that you could easily have in your pocket or in your purse or somewhere if you're going into a stressful situation. You could even, I've heard of even people just dabbing it on a Kleenex that they put in their pocket and then they just smell that really nonchalantly. But if you're way down here, lavender isn't going to be as helpful because you're already down low. Then something like peppermint or orange or something that energizes you or wakes you up would be helpful. So part of getting back in your window is also having the awareness of where you are relative to it and which direction you need to go to get there. Music, so the sense of sound, for example, leveraging music. If you're way low, something that energizes you or inspires you. If you're way up high, something calming that brings you down, or nature noises or something like that. A lot of this is actually things that people do all the time without realizing it, but being more intentional, that I can actually have a toolkit to help me through situations. Body movement, I would say, is one of the biggest things that helps us get back into our window. So even if you think of being at work all day long and just grinding through, like getting up to take walking breaks or doing jumping jacks, or I had you guys do this at the beginning, which was really silly, but it actually shifts our brain state. It actually brings us back into the present moment. So leveraging that, taking walks. There's something called bilateral stimulation, and I want to have you guys try this. If you're willing to hook your thumbs and put it on your chest. Yep, hook your thumbs and then very slowly and intentionally go back and forth. And as you do this very slowly, it automatically brings calming to your body. It's similar to deep breathing where it brings down your physiology. There's something in the trauma field that we do. It's this technique called EMDR, but it's something that people are using bilateral stimulation, but it's helping shift their brain states from states where it's trapped into emotion to get shifted into logic and reason. So that bilateral stimulation, it's kind of similar to rapid eye movement when you're sleeping. It's shifting, it's helping process through information. It's actually why a lot of people love running, and it helps them clear their mind. Joel back there loves running. Both those guys ran the marathon yesterday and helped set up here after. So shout out to that. So that being said, running is that. It's bilateral stimulation. So a lot of people go running to clear their head and process through things. It's things we do, we don't even know it's valuable in those ways in our mind or emotions. So that being said, this butterfly tapping is helpful, but not always useful in public situations, unless you're very don't care what other people think, which I think is great. So feel free to bust this out. But if you can't, or you're not at that level yet of self-confidence, then I do have one that is a little less obvious that I think is still helpful. So right now, if you all firmly plant your feet on the ground and are aware of your feet touching the ground, and then just very slowly, intentionally tap back and forth, it will have a similar effect. Instead of something like a restless leg, that's way up here and hyper and it's not bringing any calming, this is something slow and intentional. And that's something you could easily do in a meeting, or you're at a desk or at a boardroom table and no one's going to even notice. So that's something. But leveraging physical movement, that's key, because I used to actually think I didn't value the physical movement as much, because all my training and background, my focus was on understanding thoughts and emotions, my own and other people's, and processing things. And I didn't realize, oh, a lot of that gets processed even just through physical movement. Even if you think of the stereotype of high school athletes or jocks, most of them aren't as anxious. Like, they're just not thinking about, they're just not as stressed out. And I know that's a stereotype, but just in general, why that's even a stereotype is because of how physically active they are. They're so engaged with their body that they're not flying up here. So we can take from that somewhat to be more connected to your body. The sense of taste, something like brushing your teeth in the middle of the day, something refreshing, or having a peppermint, or something that just kind of wakens you up. And the other thing, it's not in the 5 senses, but I highly recommend, is sometimes just taking a nap. Sometimes things seem like a really big deal, and then once we sleep, we have clarity again. Basically, we're just thinking about, I'm going to get back in my brain state first. Just checking the time here. Oh, okay. So I want to just take a couple of questions, and then after that, I'll let you know about the giveaway. So based on what we've been talking about, does anyone have any questions off the bat?
So I'm wondering a little bit how this concept, how it interacts with like the physical and physiological demands of starting a company. I mean, I know that I felt at times when I was working really hard, like this flow state just like shrunk down to essentially nothing, right? That everything was above or below and mediated by just like pure infusions of discipline, or like lots of energy drinks, or other things from the high end with getting down high to low. But
yeah, how do you apply this to startup life?
yeah, I mean, it seems, this all seems really super valuable. I just like how you're working 20 hours a day. I guess, how do you think about trying to bring some of these concepts in?
Right. So the question, I'm guessing you all heard it, but basically, how do you apply this to when the demands of growing a business are so strong? It's very easy to just operate out of your window. And you have to, because there's so many things to react out of. So the first thing is, we're just doing the best we can. And there's different seasons in life. And so how I think about this is, over time, I'm resetting my default systems to be more in my window. And even with how I think about myself and view the world, I'm shifting my default systems, or my default settings. I'm always going to get thrown out at some point, but if I know what my default settings are, I know where to return, what my middle place is. So first, knowing that, being kind and patient with yourself, and then even knowing the goal is to operate, again, from in your window, but even within the window, there's variance from being close to the bottom for in the middle to up. And I would say even a big part of startup life is you really have to ride that line in a sense. Again, we want to be careful to not go over, because then your higher brain shuts down and it's going to actually hinder you. But you actually have to really act on things. So that being said, there's no perfect, easy solution, because really, if you think about it, a startup situation is a survival setting. It's not a thriving situation. And so you're doing your best to survive, but you can't live surviving forever. You can only go so far. So it's as many little mini things you can do along the way. So it's kind of like you can have a perfectly good car, but if there's no gas in it, or you don't do regular oil changes, so it's getting then the maintenance in whatever way you can, whenever you can get it. Or maybe it's, even if it's a 20-hour day, you at least take a few minutes at the beginning to do something that you like to do, or you pause and watch a funny video, or wherever you're getting poured into, you're infusing survival maintenance until you have enough breath, like you have a breath of fresh air to gain perspective. I also think about it, so for me, when I think about the scaling thing, I also think of that in terms of there's times where I scale the mountain and I see from a bigger perspective, and then there's times when I come down and execute from that place. Because that's another part of running a business, is you have to navigate so much and go back and forth between the big picture and building it in the future to all the day-to-day tactical and practical things, and that's so hard to shift gears. So even recognizing that you need to do that, and again, it's hard to recognize that when there's no margin or space. That's why even something like this, it's like, oh yeah, that is vital. Or even what you experienced in that company was, yeah, that was survival and it got derailed. So as much as possible, it's infusing those healthy maintenance habits. And I shared this at the first one this morning, the first session, but there's something that is always helpful to me, and I probably talk about it or bring it up at least 10 times a day, and it comes from the AA literature, Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's something you maybe heard in movies or different things, but it's called the Serenity Prayer, and it basically says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So the serenity to accept what I don't have control over, courage to change what I do, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because usually we're so stressed out about the stuff we have no control over, other people, clients, all these outside factors, and we don't see what we do have control over. So even this is, I'm going to then figure out the strategies that work for me and start my day with them. The last thing I'll say to this also came up in the first time, was this other story that I love, and I think it's a really helpful analogy for this whole startup world and entrepreneurship. It's the story of the two woodcutters, and I'll give a shortened version of it. But basically, these two woodcutters are chopping trees, and they're going to have a contest who can chop down the most trees by the end of the day. And one of them is this more experienced man that's been around, and the other is this fresh guy that's really excited to beat the experienced man. So they're chopping away wood, and then every once in a while, the more experienced man takes a break. And when he does that, he invites the other boy to join him, who doesn't, because he said, I'm not going to stop, I'm going to keep chopping wood because I'm going to beat you. At the end of the day, when they compared who chopped more wood, it was the experienced guy. And when the shocked young, fresh guy asked him, how is that even possible? I was chopping away and you kept taking breaks. The experienced man said, every time I took a break, I was sharpening my axe. And the thing is, you can chop way more trees from a sharpened axe than just whacking away with a dull blade. So that's hard in startup world too, because the time is money, we gotta go, go, go. But recognizing sometimes from a place of being filled up and clear-minded, we can execute way more than we're just frantically trying to make everything work. So again, it's challenging and hard, but it's beginning to infuse that stuff. One thing, I'm going to take another question, but I've gone over time, so if you have to leave, I want you to know that. But I'm going to take one more question and then let you guys know about the giveaway, and then you can ask me more questions after too. So.
Okay, I just wanted to tie back that you're starting with the earliest part and then this chart. So you said we need to, as we kind of work ourselves up to greater and greater, I don't want to say the ladder, but you get the idea. We want to get
Yeah.
better and better